In this next video, we're going to talk about another classic algorithmic strategy, which in many cases yields polynomial time algorithms. Divide and conquer works for some problems, but it works specifically when we can break these problems into pieces that can be solved almost independently of each other, so that then there's just a little bit of extra work to do to get the answer to the entire problem. But many problems we encounter aren't like that. They're too entangled. The parts of them can't be separated from each other. And so we just can't break them up into pieces and solve those pieces independently. We have to think more about how we progress through the problem and how one part of our solution might affect our opportunities for another part of the solution. So, dynamic programming is this kind of strategy. I'm going to illustrate it with a problem which is very important in genomics. Namely, if I have two variants of a genome, we know that they're not going to be identical. These might be related species. They might even be two individuals of the same species. So what genome alignment does is it identifies part of my genome and part of your genome as corresponding to the same gene, doing the same job in the cell, making the same protein or whatever, but trying to recognize the unimportant differences between our genes as well. Of course, if we're trying to understand how mutations work, these might be important differences. But the point is to line up our genomes with each other as much as we possibly can. So here's a little toy version of this problem, and we're going to think about there being three kinds of mutations or changes. One is that some things could simply be deleted. That kind of mutation could simply drop a base pair from the DNA or an amino acid from an amino acid sequence. There might be other mutations which introduce new base pairs or amino acids, and there might be point mutations which change a symbol from one to the other. So if you're paying attention, you can see that having deleted a few of the things on the top, added a few things on the bottom, and changed that G to a C, we can now line up all the remaining symbols with each other. So this explanation, oh, well, we inserted a few things, deleted a few things, and changed a few things, could be a plausible explanation of how your genome turned into mine, or how we have a common ancestor. On the other hand, we want to find the best possible explanation, the most likely one, and that means the one with the smallest number of mutations. This one had a total of 5 mutations, so we would say it has a cost of 5. There were 2 deletions, 2 insertions, and 1 change. But how can you tell if I give you 2 strings, what is the alignment and the set of mutations of the smallest possible cost? This is an interesting optimization problem. And a priori, there are exponentially many ways that I could line up the symbols of one string with the symbols of another string. So again, it's initially not obvious that we can actually find the minimum cost alignment in polynomial time. But we can. And to illustrate that, I'm going to use another example, changing one important profession to another important profession. And happily, they have some letters in common. So I'm going to delete that P, I'm going to delete that Y and that C, I'm going to add an N and an M, finally and an E, I need an E as well, and finally I'm going to change the K to an R. And now everything lines up. This has a total cost of 7, the 3 deletions, the 3 insertions, and the change. Now we're going to check to see if this is really the best we can do and figure out how algorithmically we might do that. The idea is that we need to make some initial choice. And we have a couple initial choices. So let's start at the left end of these strings. We could add the A in astronomer. That's an option. But then we would have to figure out the best way to align pastry cook with the rest of the string astronomer. Okay? That is another smaller problem of the same kind. Not quite like divide and conquer. We're not dividing the problem into halves, but we are reducing it to a smaller problem of the same type, which we could then recursively try to solve using the same technique. But of course, this wasn't our only option. We could also change the P to an A and then try to align Cook with astronomer, or, and I know you already know this is the best choice, we could delete the P and align Cook with astronomer. As we go down this set of choices, we can compute recursively the minimum cost of the string. You should pay attention to this formula if you feel like it, but let me just explain the notation so that you can look at it at your leisure. S and T are our two strings. D of S and T is the minimum total number of mutations we need to change one to another. S prime is S with the first symbol deleted, and T prime is T with the first symbol deleted, like Cook and astronomer. And so what this function says is it's just laying out the different options we have. We can delete the first letter of S and then try to align S prime with T. That's that first term. But it costs us 1 unit to do that deletion, hence the +1. Or we could add the first letter of T and then try to align S and T prime, again with a +1 for adding. Or we could change the first letter of S into the first letter of T. If they're identical, that doesn't cost us anything. It's not even a change. But if they're different, that also costs us a +1. So this is a way of writing mathematically what this minimum cost will be, recursively in terms of shorter strings. Now, as we try to keep applying this, we'll find ourselves dealing with lots of sub-problems, smaller versions of the same problem on parts of the string. But there's some good news. All of our sub-problems consist of taking some final part of pastry cook and some final part of astronomer. And if each of these strings are only n symbols long, then even if you looked at all possible pairs of strings that we could ever care about, all possible sub-problems, there's only n times n, or n squared. And that's why you can do this in polynomial time, because there are only polynomially many sub-problems that we'll ever need to figure out, and because it takes very little work to combine them into results for the overall thing. Algorithms like this are in use every day in genomics, and they're how we identify the corresponding parts, the parts that one organism has in common with another functionally in its genome.